Hey everyone, tonight we're starting in the middle of something that's been 28 years in the making. The cream-colored envelope shook between my fingers like it carried a live wire. It wasn't the invitation itself that unraveled me. It was the embossed return address, Harrington Residence, and the name below it. Rebecca Harrington, née Broner. That little name might as well have been a dagger. My daughter. My only child. After nearly 3 decades of silence, she had reappeared in my mailbox without a single explanation. Just a wedding invitation for someone named Melissa, whom I could only assume was my granddaughter. A girl I'd never met. The timing, a little too perfect. Just 3 days earlier, my face had been plastered across local newspapers with the kind of headline you only see in fiction: local bookstore owner wins $500 million Powerball. Suddenly, I wasn't just Emily Broner, the quiet woman who ran a cozy corner bookstore. I was a headline, a windfall, a jackpot. Apparently, I was also family again. You might think this is the moment where I burst into tears and clutched the letter to my chest like some long-lost relic. But nah. I've had 28 years to process this grief. Let's just say I recognized the scent of a conditional reunion when I smelled it. So, before you feel the heat creeping up your chest, or wonder how I kept my calm, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you really like what I'm doing here. And hey, while you're at it, drop your location and your local time in the comments. It always helps to know where you're tuning in from. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soft noise, and let's get started tonight. You ever have a moment so absurdly full circle it almost feels staged? That's what this invitation felt like. But see, I'm not the type to fall for sentiment dressed up in stationery. That's how you end up at a wedding pretending the past doesn't sit beside you like an uninvited +1. I was 65. Wrinkles earned back straighter than most women half my age, and entirely unaccustomed to being seen, let alone summoned. For nearly 3 decades, I'd been invisible to Rebecca, to my grandchildren, to the Harringtons and their towering mansions, private schools, and bespoke lives. The last time I'd spoken to my daughter, she'd called me a bitter waitress, told me I was jealous, said I'd failed. And let me tell you, when someone weaponizes every sacrifice you ever made for them, that hits different. I raised Rebecca on tips and bus rides. I skipped meals so she could have ballet shoes and summer camp. My life. It became a scaffolding for hers. And when she married Charles, the smile without eyes financier, who said more with silence than he ever did with words, something shifted. My vibrant, independent girl shrank into a wife molded to someone else's expectations. Charles Thinks became her new gospel. At their wedding, I wore a dress I couldn't afford. Sold my mother's only heirloom locket for it, too. You'd think that might have earned me a dance. But no, even that moment went to Charles's father, playing the role my ex-husband had abdicated. I stood there like a stranger, watching a life I'd built walk away in satin heels. The real break happened later. A bruise on her wrist, a whispered excuse, and my desperate attempt to reach her to remind her she was worth more than some man's approval. She didn't want to hear it. Not from a woman in rubber-soled waitress shoes. You're nothing but a bitter aging waitress who couldn't even keep a husband. Those were her exact words. I remember because they splintered something in me that never quite healed. She told me to leave. So I did. Into the rain. Into silence. Into 28 years of never being called Mom again. Old age comes with its own kind of clarity. You learn that sometimes love doesn't end in a grand confrontation. Sometimes it ends in slow fading, in calls, unreturned, in photos never sent. And you learn to stop checking the mailbox. But grief gets clever. It disguises itself. Some mornings it looked like overwatering my plants. Other days it was staying late at the diner to scrub an already clean counter. It lives in routines, hides in thrift store frames and old voicemail tapes, And then one day it gets an invitation to a wedding from the ghost of a daughter who once erased you. Did I open the RSVP card? You bet I did. Did I respond? Not yet. Because if you've learned anything at all in 65 years, it's this: not every invitation deserves an answer. So I tucked the envelope on the mantel next to a picture of Rebecca as a toddler with ice cream on her nose. And then I made a cup of tea, chamomile with honey and the tiniest splash of bourbon. Wisdom, after all, comes with seasoning. And if you're wondering, Emily, aren't you even curious? I am. But I'm also tired of pretending like time and pain don't leave stains, especially the ones shaped like family. I was 37 when my daughter looked me in the eye and told me I was an embarrassment. It's funny how memory works, how certain details, even decades later, stay as sharp as broken glass. The kitchen smelled like rosemary chicken. Rebecca was wearing a cream blouse I'd bought her at a Macy's sale. There was a chip on the rim of the wine glass she held too tightly in one hand, and a bruise peeking out from beneath the sleeve of her other. And I was standing across from her, my hands still damp from washing dishes, trying to find the version of her I'd once known. "You're jealous because I have what you never could," she said. "A beautiful home, financial security, respect." I should have left right then, walked out with some scrap of dignity. But I didn't. I stood there heart-hammering, trying to fix what was already broken beyond recognition. "Rebecca," I whispered, "he doesn't love you. He owns you." That was the moment the doors slammed shut. Not literally, her voice was the only thing that slammed. Loud enough to shatter every dream I'd had of us sitting at a kitchen table someday, laughing over burnt cookies and toddler stories. "I don't want you in my life anymore. You're toxic, Mom." People always say, "Oh, mothers and daughters fight. Give it time." But what they don't understand is that some fights don't get around too. Some words are one-way doors. I waited for a call that never came. I sent gifts that were returned unopened. I drove by her house just once saw her belly round with my first grandchild. She looked up, our eyes met across the distance, and she turned away like I was a stranger on the street. And I guess I was. The thing is, when you pour yourself so completely into someone else, you forget what shape you used to be. I didn't know who I was without her. My identity had been Rebecca's mum for so long that when that title vanished, I felt like a book without a cover. The grief wasn't sharp, it was dull, heavy. It sat on me like wet laundry you never got around to folding. Everything I used to love became a reminder. Birthday cards in the drugstore aisle, I'd leave the cart and walk out. Little girls with brown curls and questions, I'd fake a smile and disappear to the break room. Old age wisdom, fact of the day: grief doesn't get smaller. Your life just gets bigger around it if you let it. I didn't not right away. I kept shrinking instead. Worked longer hours at the diner, picked up cleaning gigs again like I was 27 with rent due. Dewey, my manager, used to say, "Emily, you're going to scrub a hole in the floor one day." I'd smile and tell her holes were cheaper than therapists. The diner became my second skin. Tuesday was meatloaf day. Mr. Finch would tell me the same war story like it was brand new. Thursdays. Widow Jenkins brought her homemade jam and asked about my family in a voice soft enough to break bones. I became everyone's surrogate mother, advice giver, silent cheerleader. It kept me busy, kept me upright. Quirky fact of the day: banana peels can polish leather shoes. Learned that from a college student who cried over a breakup and left me a thank you note with that gem inside. Life's weird like that. Sometimes wisdom comes on paper napkins. Time passed. I let my hair go grey, stopped buying birthday presents, stopped checking the mail twice a day. My heart went quiet. Not healed, just quieter. Until one night, during a particularly slow shift, I found myself staring at the smudge on the counter that looked suspiciously like a question mark. And I realized I didn't want to die like this. Alone, exhausted, defined by someone who'd long since erased me. That December evening had become my origin story. But maybe it didn't have to be my whole story. academic debate phrase of the day. One could argue that the absence of closure constitutes a form of psychological entrapment. Yep, that hit home. So I did something unexpected. I started to save. Not for her, for me. A little each paycheck tucked into an envelope I labeled someday. It felt stupid at first, like putting pennies toward a rocket ship, but it was mine. A secret rebellion against the version of me who had stopped dreaming. I had no idea what someday looked like. A trip, a new coat, a bookstore. Okay, maybe I did know, but it felt ridiculous. Me owning a bookstore. That was the kind of dream people like Rebecca had scoffed at while sipping imported wine and talking Roth IRAs. Still, the envelope thickened, quietly, like a prayer made out of paper. And I started whispering to myself when I was alone. If I was nothing to her, I would become something to myself. That became my bedtime mantra. By year 3, I stopped sending letters. By year 5, I stopped driving past her house. And by year 10, I stopped crying over her birthday. The ache never left, but it stopped being the only thing I felt. Funny how people think healing looks like sunshine and clarity, but sometimes it just looks like one woman buying herself a hardcover book at full price without guilt. You can't rewrite the past, but you can underline the parts that made you strong. The trick to surviving estrangement is to find new ways to measure love. When your child no longer speaks your name, you have to get creative. You learn to find tenderness in small places, in the way Widow Jenkins says I saved the good jam for you, or the way the college kids linger after meals, asking questions about life, like you're some kind of oracle in an apron. By the time I hit 45, I had mastered the art of living on the sidelines. I knew when to nod without inserting myself, how to care deeply without expecting anything back. I'd become the friendly ghost of my own life, hovering, helpful, invisible. It was around then that I developed what I called the Sunday duck theory. Every Sunday morning, like clockwork, I'd walk to the local park with a bag of cracked corn and breadcrumbs. I'd sit on the same weathered bench, second one from the left, under the lopsided oak, and feed the ducks. Rain or shine. Holidays included. People thought I liked birds. I didn't. Ducks are weirdly aggressive, and they have zero respect for personal space. But they reminded me of consistency, of mothering. You show up. You feed them. They don't love you, but they come back anyway. Quirky fact of the day: a group of ducks on the ground is called a raft, which frankly feels poetic. All of us trying to float together, no direction, just bobbing along. Most Sundays, I'd spot families. Mums pushing strollers, dads chasing kites, grandparents feeding children who fed ducks. And always that quiet throb would return. Not sharp, not screaming. Just a low, dull pulse behind my ribs. I never imagined I'd miss someone I hadn't seen in a decade. But I did. And I missed someone I'd never met, too. James. That's what they named my grandson. I found out from the birth announcement in the local paper. Full colour, proud as punch. I clipped it and tucked it into the Someday Fund folder right next to a faded photo of Rebecca at her own second birthday party, frosting in her ears. I sent a quilt. Took me 3 months to make. Tiny stitches, hand-sewn, every square a prayer. It came back the next week, unopened. No note, just returned to sender. For the second grandchild, Emma, I didn't send anything. Just stood in the fabric store and cried quietly next to the embroidery floss. People always assume motherhood is about holding on. But sometimes it's about learning how to let go in stages. And sometimes you let go so slowly you don't even notice until one day you can breathe again. I was living in a rent-controlled apartment above a laundromat. The neighbours were loud, the heater clanked like it was haunted, and my fridge was as old as my last relationship. But it was mine. The walls were covered in used bookstore posters, yellowing with age. One said, "Between the pages of a book is a lovely place to be." And I took that literally. I read. A lot. Especially in the evenings when the ache of silence grew teeth. Old age wisdom, fact. Routine is a ladder you climb out of sadness with. You don't leap. You don't soar. You take tiny, creaky steps. Every Thursday night, I enrolled in a community college course. Accounting, then business, then literature. My classmates were mostly teenagers, exhausted parents, or retirees. We were a weird little patchwork family that never met for dinner, but somehow knew each other's dreams. "You're going to be a CEO one day, Miss B," a kid named Tar once told me after I helped him understand compound interest. I laughed. "I'll be lucky if I remember where I parked my car, Tar." But something shifted when he said that, like a door cracked open in my brain. That bookstore dream, the one I'd buried under reality, and Rebecca's dismissive laughter started whispering again. A shop with mismatched chairs, coffee that wasn't too fancy, shelves organized by mood, books for rainy days, breakups, new beginnings. I even made a list one night, novels that don't end in death, stories that make you feel seen, books for when you can't call your mum. That last one stung. I deleted it, then retyped it. The someday fund was growing, not fast but steady, like a seed in winter soil. I didn't touch it. Not when my car needed repairs. Not when I cracked a molar on a peanut brittle from the church bake sale. That money wasn't for emergencies. It was for resurrection. Academic debate phrase of the day. Self-actualization in later adulthood remains an underexplored yet deeply vital concept. Translation: you can reinvent yourself at any age. You don't need a permission slip, or a family cheer squad, or even approval from your past self. What you need is one stubborn belief: I deserve more. So I kept going. I saved. I studied. I stitched quilts I never sent. I fed ducks I didn't like. And I watched from afar. Because yes, I still drove by their house. Once a month. Just enough to remind myself that the pain was real, that I hadn't dreamed her up. And from my safe little distance, I watched James grow tall and lean like my father. Emma, with my chin and a book always in her lap, made me ache in places I didn't know still ached. Once on Emma's 10th birthday, I parked across the street and watched the party unfold like a movie I didn't buy a ticket for. Clowns, ponies, laughter. Emma pressed her face to the bounce house window, eyes shining. Our eyes met for half a second, and maybe something in her recognized something in me. Then Rebecca appeared. She put a hand on Emma's shoulder, protective, possessive. She scanned the street. I drove away before she could see me. Or maybe before she could decide what to do if she did. That was the month I stopped asking why she hated me. I started asking something much scarier. Who am I when I stop waiting for her to love me again? By the time I turned 50, I had perfected the art of pretending not to care. I could walk past Rebecca's neighborhood without flinching. I could see mothers and daughters at brunch, laughing over the same mimosa, and pretend it didn't slice through me like a whisper-thin blade. I could hear someone say grandma in the grocery store without knocking over a stack of peaches. Mostly. Grief, I'd learned, has its own geography. There were valleys so low I couldn't get out of bed, except to show up for my shift at the diner, and even then, I'd sometimes just stand in the supply closet and cry into a stack of napkins. There were plateaus, where nothing hurt, but nothing felt good, either just bland survival. And then, every now and then, there were peaks, tiny, unexpected moments, when I could laugh at a dumb pun, or dance around my living room to a Bee Gees song without immediately choking on guilt. I was alive, not thriving, but stubbornly, persistently alive. On Sundays, it was still ducks. Same bench, same bag of bread. I once brought the wrong kind of grain, and a lady walking her Pomeranian actually scolded me. "You're going to give them a digestive issue," she said, clutching her dog like I was a cereal-based assassin. I apologized, then laughed the entire walk home. People get passionate about ducks. Quirky fact of the day: ducklings imprint on the first moving thing they see, even if it's a human. Or I suppose a tired woman with too many regrets and an oversized tote bag. Maybe that's why I kept showing up. hoping something in the universe might imprint on me. Stick around. I needed the noise, even the soft kind. The sound of wings, flapping of leaves, crunching under baby strollers of life moving on without me. Thursday nights, I kept taking community college classes, slowly stitching together something that resembled a future. I wasn't aiming for a diploma, I didn't even think I could. But the classrooms became a second home. The smell of whiteboard markers, the shuffling of syllabi, the crinkle of sandwich wrappers, oddly comforting. One night after a business class, my professor stopped me in the hallway. "Emily, have you considered enrolling full-time? You're one of my best students." I laughed because that was easier than crying. "I'm old enough to be everyone's mum here." "Exactly," he said with a grin. "Moms get stuff done." That night, I sat on my sofa, surrounded by textbooks mail and an unpaid electric bill, and stared at the wall for a full hour. Could I do it? More importantly, did I want to? Academic debate phrase of the day. The narrative of reinvention is frequently limited by social ageism, despite evidence to the contrary. Translation. Just because society tells you your story is over doesn't mean you can't pick up the pen. And so I applied. Business administration part-time. Paid the first semester with my someday fund. That hurt. Watching those bills dwindle felt like parting with pieces of hope. But maybe this was the hope. Not the dream bookstore, not yet. But the knowledge that would eventually get me there. I didn't tell anyone. Not Dewey, not Tar, not even the ducks. I just started. The coursework was tough, especially in a brain that hadn't been tested since rotary phones were cutting edge. But I kept going. At the diner, I shifted my schedule to accommodate evening classes. My feet were sore, my eyes dry, my brain overloaded with balance sheets and marketing theories. But I hadn't felt this awake in years. By year 15 of the Silence with Rebecca, something else changed. I got a card. Christmas. A professionally printed family photo. Rebecca, Charles James, and Emma smiling stiffly in front of a staircase so grand it looked like it belonged in a hotel. "Wishing you joy this holiday season. The Harringtons." No note, no message, not even a scribbled "Love, Mom." Just a picture, perfect on the outside. And yet, it rattled me. I stared at their faces for hours, taped it inside my closet door, then tore it down 2 days later. Put it in the trash. Dug it out. Taped it back. It was the most contact I'd had in a decade. The next day, another envelope came. An invitation to James's piano recital. At Whitmore Academy, no less. Fancy private school. White gloves and winter coats kind of place. I went. I wore a dress I hadn't dusted off in years. Sat in the very last row like a secret. When James walked onto the stage, taller than I'd imagined, serious in a way that felt too adult, it hit me like a wave. I had a grandson who could play Chopin, and I didn't know his favorite color, his favorite cereal, if he liked cats or dogs. He played with precision, not passion. But still it was beautiful. Afterward, I saw Rebecca across the reception hall. Our eyes met. Briefly. Her lips didn't move. Her face didn't soften. She turned and walked away, her family trailing behind her like silk ribbons. I stayed for punch I didn't drink, took a program I didn't read, then drove home and cried like it was year one again. This was what the void had become. Not a clean absence, but a slow drip of awareness. I was permitted to observe, just not to participate. And still I went to every event I was invited to after that. Recitals, graduations, art shows, always invited formally, never welcomed personally. I was a ghost at every gathering, but I showed up. That became my new ritual. I filled albums with programs, newspaper clippings, photos taken from a distance. A strange kind of scrapbook for a family that never acknowledged the hand that turned its pages. Old age wisdom. Sometimes love is what you do not, what they see. And what I did was wait. But not just for her. I also waited for the moment I'd be ready to stop waiting altogether. It was coming. I could feel it. The decision came quietly, like most important ones do. No fireworks, no epiphany. Just a Tuesday evening, lukewarm coffee in hand, a spreadsheet open on my second-hand laptop, and a post-it note that said, "If not now, when?" I was 58. My joints creaked in the mornings. My knees complained every time I stood up from a booth at the diner. But my mind, sharper than it had been in years. I'd passed my last class with a 94. I knew how to write a business plan, calculate taxes, and navigate city permit websites that looked like they hadn't been updated since dial-up. The someday fund had grown, slowly, steadily. Tips, scholarships, odd jobs. One modest inheritance from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 2 decades. It still wasn't enough for everything I dreamed of, but maybe it was enough for something. And more importantly, I'd stopped waiting for Rebecca to give me a reason to live. She hadn't written, hadn't called. But she kept sending those invitations, birthdays, recitals, even the occasional glossy family newsletter with little notes about James's cello or Emma's science fair. I didn't know if it was guilt habit or a strange form of punishment, but I realized something: those envelopes no longer made me cry. They made me sigh, then shrug, then on occasion smile. That, I think, is when healing really begins. So I started visiting every small, empty storefront in town. Some still smelled like cigarettes from whatever failed business had come before. Some had windows so dirty I had to squint to imagine the light inside. But just one had a crooked "For Lease" sign, a floor plan shaped like an open palm, and enough warmth to feel like mine. It had brick walls, uneven floorboards, and a tin ceiling that sang when it rained. I called it Broner Books and Brew. The lease was terrifying, the renovation estimate even worse. But I had enough to make it start. The rest, that would come. Somehow. The city clerk gave me a hard time about zoning, but I brought cookies and charm, and my thick binder of every form they could possibly ask for. The electrician called me Mom, until I showed him I could rewire a light fixture better than he could. The college kids I used to tutor came to paint walls and build shelves for free coffee and stories. I filled the shelves with books I'd loved and ones I hadn't read yet. Novels that hurt in a good way. Memoirs that felt like bandages. Poetry that made silence feel like prayer. And then I made a little section in the back. No sign, no label. Just a cluster of chairs, a coffee pot, and a shelf marked in chalk for the ones who are starting over. That shelf was always full. I opened quietly. No ribbon-cutting ceremony. Just a hand-lettered sign: "Open if you need us." The first customer was a man in his 70s who wandered in thinking we were a hardware store. He left with a book on watercolor painting and a chocolate muffin. Told me he hadn't read anything since the 80s. The second was a high school girl looking for something to help her stop crying at night. I gave her the bell jar and a cup of peppermint tea. The third, a young woman who said, "I don't know why I came in. I just saw the lights." I told her, "That's why I leave them on." By month 3, we were a community. People who didn't belong anywhere else found corners in my shop. Divorced dads, burnt-out teachers, lonely teens, retired nurses, recovering alcoholics, poets who never published a thing, grandmothers estranged from their children who read aloud to strangers' kids as if it were their job. And me, I was more than Rebecca's mother now. I was Emily Broner, bookstore owner, purveyor of coffee, keeper of good pens, therapist by default. I wore cardigans with holes and carried a pencil behind my ear. I woke up each morning with purpose, not pain. But of course the universe wasn't done with me yet, not even close, because just when everything had begun to bloom, I bought a lottery ticket. It was a joke, really. One of the kids behind the counter at the gas station dared me. "You've got that lucky librarian vibe," he said. I scratched it in the parking lot. 3 matching numbers. A week later, another ticket. All the numbers. Every single one. $500 million. You'd think I screamed, jumped, ran in circles, but I didn't. I just sat in my car with the heater running and stared at the ticket like it was a receipt for a life I hadn't ordered. Winning doesn't feel the way people say it does. It feels heavy, like suddenly everyone in the world can smell you through a wall. I claimed it quietly, anonymously. No TV crews, no big check, just a trust fund, a lawyer, a P.O. box. I donated most of it, quietly, anonymously. Women's shelters, scholarship funds, community clinics. The rest, I put it in a new account labeled Freedom, and I didn't tell anyone, not even the people closest to me. Not at first, except one person found out. And a week later, the wedding invitation arrived. Rebecca's handwriting on the envelope. Not a card from a print shop, not a return address sticker. Handwritten, the bride's name, Melissa Harrington. Emma. She'd grown up, she was getting married, and she or someone wanted me there. But the timing, 1 week after my win, made headlines. She must have seen my name in the paper. Even with all my precautions, it had leaked. One tabloid ran it with the headline, "Small Town Book Lady Becomes Billionaire." That was all it took. And now, just like that, after 28 years of silence, shame, distance, and perfectly wrapped nothingness, I was invited. No apology. No explanation. Just an RSVP line that said, "Please join us as we begin our forever." And I swear, I laughed. Not cruelly, not bitterly. Just that quiet, breathless kind of laugh that comes when the universe finally shows you its hand. Because I wasn't the same woman she'd cast out all those years ago. And this wasn't a reunion. It was a reckoning. Let me tell you something that no one ever teaches you. There is a particular kind of silence that follows sudden wealth. It's not peace. It's not even relief. It's a void. Because once the shock wears off, once you've taken the pictures signed, the forms, moved the decimal point in your brain, you start asking yourself terrifying questions like, am I still the same person who's going to show up now? Who's going to pretend they never left? And most haunting of all, what do I want now that I can have anything? I didn't go out and buy a yacht. I didn't fly to Paris or redecorate my tiny apartment. I didn't even buy a new pair of shoes, though, Lord knows, the soles on my old ones had worn thin from all the duck feeding and bookstore pacing. What I did do was sit very, very still. For days. In the quiet of my apartment, with the hum of the old radiator and the buzz of the city outside my window, I stared at my bank account and whispered to no one. What now? I could feel Rebecca's invitation pulsing from across the room like a heartbeat. That little RSVP card sitting on the mantel next to a cold cup of tea, and a heart that no longer broke at the sight of her handwriting. Not long after the lottery win, I had a heart attack. Mild, they called it. Warning shot, the doctor said. I was shelving a new delivery of books, boxed sets of Austen Bronte Morrison, when the floor suddenly tilted and the lights seemed to blur. My left arm tingled, not with pain, but with something like betrayal. They kept me overnight. Monitors beeped, nurses came and went. And for the first time in a long, long while, I realized something: I didn't want to die alone. Not because I needed someone to love me in that moment, but because I wanted someone to see me, to know I had existed beyond the waitress uniform, beyond the ghosted invitations, beyond the quiet rituals I'd built to survive my own erasure. So I made a list. I called it the Emily Plan. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine, and it had rules. Live boldly. No more shrinking to fit into someone else's silence. Leave a legacy, not money, meaning. Speak when it matters, even if my voice shakes. Answer the invitation, but on my terms. Let go. For real this time. Old age wisdom. We think revenge looks like slamming doors or cutting people off. But sometimes it looks like healing in public, thriving out loud, smiling at the very people who thought you wouldn't survive without them. I spent the weeks after my hospital stay doing something no one expected. I trained. Morning walks. Lap swimming at the Y, nutrient-dense meals that tasted like cardboard but kept me moving. I swapped bourbon for lemon water. Gave up red meat. Took my pills every single day. Even the ones that made me dizzy. Because if I was going to go to that wedding, I wanted to walk in upright. I bought a dress. Not black, not beige. but deep violet like dusk, like royalty. Simple, elegant, pockets, of course. It made me feel like someone no longer asking for permission. I practiced saying her name again, too. Rebecca. It used to feel like a wound. Now it was just a name. A name I used to say like a prayer, and now perhaps like punctuation. Something that ended a sentence instead of opening a plea. And then one evening I pulled out the file labeled Estate and Trust. I worked with a lawyer, one of the good ones, the kind that speaks softly and drafts ironclad documents. We created a structure so airtight that not even love could be used to manipulate it. Every dollar was accounted for, every beneficiary chosen. No direct access, no loopholes, no manipulation. I'd watched too many lottery stories end in lawsuits, broken families, and greedy hands. That wasn't going to be me. I left a generous but guarded legacy for the bookstore, for scholarships, for young women rebuilding after estrangement, for programs that taught older adults how to reinvent themselves one dream at a time. And as for Rebecca, she would get something too. But not yet. Not like this, because I knew what was coming. That invitation wasn't a peace offering. It was a test. Will she come? What will she say? What does she have now? They thought they were pulling the strings, but what they didn't realize was I'd cut the cords years ago. The day I sent the RSVP card back, I used my best handwriting. Black ink, steady strokes, one word, attending, and nothing else. No note, no message, not even a sincerely. Because sometimes silence is no longer a wound, it's a boundary. And this time I wasn't walking into a trap. I was walking into a performance, and I was bringing the curtain down myself. The morning of the wedding was unnaturally quiet. Even the birds outside my apartment window, usually full of Sunday gossip, seemed to hold their breath. I woke before dawn, not from an alarm, but from the clarity that comes only after years of rehearsing a moment you're finally ready to live. I pressed my violet dress, set out the pearl earrings my mother had left me, and brewed a cup of jasmine tea strong enough to steady my hands. No bourbon. No pills for nerves. Just me and a body that had carried grief longer than it carried youth. Before I left, I walked into the bookstore, still dark and asleep, its scent a blend of old paper and cinnamon. I unlocked the drawer under the counter and pulled out the photo I kept there. Rebecca, age 9, grinning with a missing front tooth and a glitter-splattered t-shirt. I kissed the edge of the frame. You were worth everything, I whispered. Even this. Then I slipped the frame into my purse. For me, not for her. The Harrington estate was exactly what you'd expect. Manicured, marbled, and painfully sterile. Rows of imported flowers lined the drive. A string quartet played something forgettable. Guests sipped from glasses with names I couldn't pronounce. Everyone smiled with their mouths, not their eyes. I parked a block away. Walked the rest of the distance in low heels that clicked like punctuation against the stone path. I didn't belong here, and yet I'd never felt more present. A young man at the welcome table raised his brows when he read the name on my RSVP, Ms. Emily Broner. I smiled, in the flesh. He stammered. Mrs. Harrington we didn't expect. It's all right, I said, reaching for a program. I rarely do what's expected. I walked past him before he could finish fumbling for politeness. Inside the hall, I found a seat near the back, not too far, not too close. Enough to be seen if someone was looking, but not obvious enough to be approached by anyone who wasn't. The ceremony hadn't started yet. That's when I saw her. Rebecca, standing near the altar, fussing with a flower arrangement, one hand on her hip, the other smoothing invisible wrinkles from her navy silk dress. She looked tired. Beautiful, yes. But not in the effortless way she once did. There was a tightness around her eyes, a hollowness behind the flawless makeup. She looked like someone who had spent a very long time pretending not to be afraid. And then she saw me. Our eyes met, for the first time in 28 years. It wasn't cinematic. No gasps. No slow-motion montage. Just the kind of silence that doesn't need a soundtrack. She didn't smile. Neither did I. She blinked. Her lips parted like she might say something. Then someone called her name, and she turned away. That was the moment I knew I wasn't here for her. I was here for me, and maybe for the bride. Because as Melissa Emma walked down the aisle, all long limbs and trembling hands, and a dress too heavy for her youth, my heart did something I hadn't expected. It softened. She looked so much like Rebecca at that age. So full of fear and hope, trying to walk steadily into a future shaped by other people's expectations. I smiled at her, just slightly. She didn't see me, but that was okay. When the vows began, I listened. Not to the words, they were sweet, predictable, fine, but to the cracks beneath them, to the way Charles clapped too loudly, to the way Rebecca dabbed her eyes, but never truly wept, to the tension in Emma's jaw when her new husband placed the ring on her finger. This family was a performance, and I had once been the prop that didn't fit the scene. After the ceremony, I stood. I didn't linger. Didn't wait for the awkward embrace or forced small talk. I made it halfway down the gravel path before I heard the voice. "Emily?" I turned. Rebecca stood a few feet behind me, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. We stared at each other, the past crackling between us like static on a radio station we couldn't quite tune into. Then softly she said, "You look well." I almost laughed. That's funny. Last time we spoke, I was a bitter waitress with no future. She flinched, just slightly. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," I said. Not cruelly, not bitterly, just honestly. She shifted. "You didn't have to come." I nodded. "You're right, I didn't." Silence. Then I said, "But I wanted to see her. Just once. And I wanted her to know without needing to speak that she comes from women who survive." Rebecca looked down. The weight of the moment hung between us. She opened her mouth, closed it again, and that's when I pulled the envelope from my purse. "Here," I said, handing it to her. She hesitated. "What is it?" "A photo. Of you. Age 9. Glitter shirt. Ice cream on your chin. It sat on my nightstand for 30 years. She took it like it might burn her. "I'm not giving it back. Because I forgive you," I said. "I'm giving it back because I don't need to carry it anymore." She looked up then. Something in her eyes, guilt, regret, resentment, shifted. "Wait," she said as I turned to leave. I stopped. I don't know how to fix it." I exhaled slow and quiet. "Then don't try. Just stop breaking it." And I walked away, not triumphantly, but freely, because that's what healing looks like in real life. Not fireworks, not applause, just steady footsteps in the right direction. And maybe, just maybe, the sound of a photo being carefully folded back into someone's pocket. The bookstore was closed the day after the wedding, not because I was tired, though I was, but because I needed stillness. I needed to sit with what had just happened, to let it settle the way snow does, after a storm, slowly, quietly, without fanfare. I brewed tea, opened the windows, let the wind wander through the paperbacks and plants. And I wept. Not the kind of weeping I'd done for years, the muffled sobs into pillows, the grief-choked wailing that left me empty. No, this was different. This was release. Like my body had been holding on to a scream for 30 years and finally decided it didn't need to be loud to be heard. After the tears dried, I took out the wedding program and wrote on the back, "I came, I saw, I left nothing unsaid." Then I tucked it into a file labeled "Done." The following weeks brought a strange peace. A weight I'd carried for so long had evaporated, and in its place was something I hadn't felt in decades. Space. Space to imagine. Space to hope. Space to create something that wasn't born out of pain. So I started building, not just emotionally, literally. The back room of Broner Books and Brew had always been cluttered with half-filled boxes, old file cabinets, a couch that sagged in the middle. I cleaned it out, scrubbed the floor, painted the walls a soft green that reminded me of newness, and I hung a hand-painted sign above the doorway. The starting over room. No fanfare, no explanation. Just a space. People found it, slowly at first. A young mother who'd left an abusive marriage. A retired man trying to write his first poem. A teenager who didn't speak, but showed up every Thursday with charcoal sketches and left them on the table. They all sat in that little room and began again. And one morning, as I restocked a shelf of Toni Morrison novels, someone tapped on the doorframe. Emma, not Melissa, not the bride. Emma. She looked nervous, clutching her coat like it might shield her from whatever answer she was about to get. "Hi," she said. "I hope it's okay." I looked up the store. I wasn't sure if you'd... I stepped aside before she could finish. "Come in." She did, slowly, carefully, like walking on thin ice. We sat in silence for a moment before she whispered, "I didn't know. About you. About any of it." I nodded. "Not your fault." She studied my face. "I thought maybe you hated us." I smiled a little sadly. "I tried. It didn't stick." She looked down. "The photo... Mom kept it. It's on her nightstand." That surprised me. Enough to make my throat tighten. "She never talks about you. But she talks around you. Like there's a missing space in the conversation." I exhaled. She's allowed her silence. "I just don't live in it anymore." Emma reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "I wanted to invite you to something. Just you. No RSVP needed. Just if you want." I took it with shaking hands. Inside, a hand-drawn invitation, watercolor edges, ink smudges, her handwriting. New Beginnings Book Club, every Sunday at 4, hosted by me, inspired by you. No strings, just an open door. I looked up at her, and for the first time, I saw not my granddaughter. Not a symbol of what I'd lost, but a young woman choosing to reach across the space between us. "Tea or coffee?" I asked, standing. She blinked, then smiled. "Tea, please." We sat in the shop window that day, two women sipping jasmine and watching the world pass by. No promises, no apologies, just presence. And later when she left, I realized something that made my breath catch in my chest. For 30 years, I'd been waiting to be invited back in. But maybe the healing didn't begin with an invitation. Maybe it began when I stopped waiting for one. Quirky fact of the day: books breathe. Slowly. Gently. Especially when they're finally being read by the right hands. I watched Emma disappear down the street, and I whispered to the bookstore, "We're not done." Not by a long shot. The first meeting of the New Beginnings Book Club was small. Just 5 people, counting me and Emma. A woman in her 60s with tear-streaked cheeks and a copy of The Year of Magical Thinking in her lap. A teenage boy in a denim jacket who said, "I don't read much, but I want to start." A recently divorced man who used humor like a shield and brought Eat, Pray, Love because, well, it was on the shelf. And Emma, nervous but luminous, clutching a notebook full of questions. She didn't introduce herself as my granddaughter, didn't ask me to explain who I was to her. She just said, "Thank you all for being here," and began. We started with stories, not just the ones on the page, but the ones we were living through. Why we chose the book. What line haunted us the most. What healing looked like when you weren't sure you deserved it. At one point, the teenage boy Liam said something that made everyone stop breathing for a second. "I think books are like people. They don't fix anything. But sometimes they sit with you long enough that you don't feel broken." I looked at him, at his trembling hands, and saw myself. Not the version of me that cried alone in the diner storage room. The one who still believed. By the end of the meeting, I knew something had changed. Not just in the room, but in me. For so long, I'd been trying to undo the past, to reclaim what was lost, to stitch back together the version of motherhood I'd once worn like a second skin. But maybe the past wasn't something that needed fixing. Maybe it needed witnessing. A week later, Rebecca showed up. Not on Sunday. Wednesday, late afternoon, right as I was finishing inventory. She wore jeans and a wool coat, no makeup. Just her and a paper bag from a bakery I used to take her to as a child. "I brought lemon squares," she said. "Your favorite." I didn't say anything. I just unlocked the front door. She walked in like someone visiting a cemetery, slow, reverent, unsure if she was welcome. We sat at the reading table in silence. She laid the lemon squares between us. I heard you met Emma, she said. I nodded. She's remarkable. She smiled, but it cracked at the edges. She doesn't know everything, Rebecca added. About us. I didn't tell her, I said. Thank you. Pause. Then she said something I never expected to hear. I don't know how to be your daughter anymore. It was so honest, so painfully bare, I almost forgot how to breathe. I don't know how to be your mother either, I replied. And then quietly, as if testing the shape of it, but I'm willing to find out. She looked down, then up. Then, blinking fast, said, I used to walk past your bookstore and want to go in so badly, but I was afraid. Afraid of what? That you'd be okay without me. My heart didn't break. It opened, softly, without noise. Rebecca, I said, reaching for her hand. I am okay without you, but that doesn't mean I don't want you in my life. She held my hand, tight, like someone holding the edge of something before they fall in. I was angry for so long, she whispered. I thought cutting you out would hurt you. And it did. But it also punished me. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. Not yet. But we sat there for hours, drinking tea, eating lemon squares, letting the silence say the things we couldn't. Later that night, I stood in the mirror brushing my hair and thought about legacies. For years, I thought my legacy would be what I left behind. Money, property, maybe some well-folded letters. But maybe a true legacy isn't what we leave. It's what we live. The way we show up after the silence. The way we love after the damage. The way we forgive not to erase the past, but to reclaim the future. Quirky fact of the day. In Japanese pottery, there's a practice called kintsugi, where broken bowls are repaired with gold, making the cracks part of the design instead of something to hide. That's what we were becoming. Not new, not perfect, but beautiful in the breaking. Emma came to every book club after that. So did Rebecca. Never on the same week at first, but eventually they sat at the same table, not side by side, but close enough. And one day, while shelving new arrivals, I found a note slipped between two books. I'm not ready to say I'm sorry yet, but I'm ready to say thank you for coming, for surviving, for not leaving before I could find my way back. Ah, I smiled, and I tucked it in the cash register, right next to the copy of our first lease and the key to the starting over room, because some things are too sacred to throw away. Fall came like it always did in our little town, early and shy. The trees along Main Street turned the color of rust and honey. Children stomped through leaf piles with reckless joy. And at Broner Books and Brew, I switched out the summer blends for spiced chai and maple walnut muffins. The air was softer somehow, like the world had taken a long breath and was finally ready to exhale. So was I. The shop had grown into something more than I'd ever imagined. It wasn't just a bookstore or a cafe, it was a lighthouse. A place for those drifting through their own fog to find warmth, stillness, maybe even themselves. Every week, someone left a note in the starting over room. Some were anonymous. Some were full of anger. Some just said, thank you. And every time I found one, I'd add it to a growing stack in my office drawer. A secret anthology of healing. One Thursday morning, as I was rearranging the poetry section, Emma came in early. She had flour on her sleeves, a crooked smile, and a little blue box tucked under her arm. I made you something, she said, setting it on the counter. Inside was a small ceramic mug, wobbly, imperfect, cracked down one side intentionally and repaired with gold. Kintsugi. I took a class, she said. Figured it was time to learn how to fix things. I ran my fingers over the golden seam. I don't know if I can be whole again, I murmured. She shook her head. You don't have to be. You just have to be. That's enough. I stared at her the way her eyes crinkled like her mother's used to when she was still mine. And I realized I didn't want to cry. I wanted to remember. Rebecca showed up again 2 days later. She brought a donation for the local literacy drive, a box of books from her personal library. Some pristine, some well-loved. I noticed To Kill a Mockingbird had her notes in the margins, tiny scribbles in neat cursive. I thought maybe someone else should learn to see things from another's point of view. she said gently. I placed the box behind the counter. I'm proud of you. She blinked. I'm not used to hearing that. Well, I said I'm not used to saying it. So here we are. She laughed, short, surprised, genuine. It's weird, isn't it, us? Yeah, I said. But I've come to like weird. Then she hesitated, opened her purse, pulled out a folded envelope. I've been writing this for a while, she said. I didn't know if I should give it to you, but I think I need to. I took it but didn't open it right away, just held it like something alive. I was angry, she said, voice shaking. Angry at you for the choices you made. Angry at myself for needing your love, but not knowing how to receive it. I think I punished you for the parts of me I couldn't forgive. I swallowed, hard, and I punished myself for the parts of you I couldn't reach. There was a long pause. Then softly, are we okay? I looked her in the eye, steady and sure. No, but we're closer. And that was enough. Later that night, I sat on my back porch with the envelope in my lap. Moonlight painted silver ribbons across the wood. When I finally opened it, I found 3 pages, front and back. Every word written in the same hand that once scribbled "I hate you" on a teenage bedroom wall. Only now it said things like, you were never weak. You were surviving the only way you knew how. I blamed you for my pain, because it was easier than admitting I didn't know myself. You didn't fail me. You gave me life. And even when I pushed you away, I carried pieces of you in everything I did. I pressed the letter to my chest and wept. Not from sadness, from something gentler. Something like recognition. That maybe after everything we weren't mother and daughter in the traditional sense. Maybe we were 2 women finally meeting in the middle, older, worn, repaired in gold. At the next book club, Emma read aloud from her favorite essay. Then she looked up and said, do you ever feel like life doesn't give you what you ask for, but it gives you exactly what you need to grow? Everyone nodded, including me, because I had asked for love. And the world gave me loss. I asked for family. And the world gave me time alone. I asked for forgiveness. And the world gave me a long, long road back. But at the end of that road, I found myself. And that was enough. Quirky fact of the day, hummingbirds can't walk. They can only perch or fly. They never linger where they're not needed. But when they do stay still, it means they feel safe. I hung a small hummingbird feeder outside the shop the next day. One came and stayed. Winter crept in like a whisper. The shop's windows fogged in the mornings, and I kept a basket of blankets near the reading nook for anyone who needed warmth, not just from the cold, but from the ache that tended to return during the quiet months. Loss always feels louder in winter, but that year it didn't swallow me. It wrapped around me gently like a coat I'd finally grown into. One snowy morning, I found Rebecca in the starting over room. She was sitting in the corner chair reading A Man Called Ove, a cup of chamomile in her hand. She didn't look up when I walked in, but as I passed, she said, I think I used to read like a weapon, to win arguments, to sound smart. Now I read to remember that I'm not the only one trying to be okay. I nodded. That's the right kind of reading. She looked up. Can we try something? What's that? Lunch. Just us. No Emma, no books, no ghosts. I smiled. Yes, so we did. A tiny diner on 8th Street. Vinyl booths, squeaky menus. The kind of place where no one knew us or cared about our history. We talked about music, favorite soups, old movies. We didn't bring up the past until dessert when she said, you know, I spent most of my life trying not to become you. And she smiled faintly. Turns out, I like who you are now. I laughed. Took me decades to like her too. That same week, Emma asked if she could host her first workshop at the bookstore. She called it Letters to Our Younger Selves. 20 people showed up. Men, women, teens, elders. Some brought old photographs. Some brought nothing but tears. They sat in a circle, writing silently, then reading aloud the things they wished someone had told them when they were 15, or 29, or 64. I forgive you for surviving instead of thriving, someone said. You were never too much. You were just in the wrong room. said another. And then Emma stood up. She read a letter to her 15-year-old self. About loneliness. About the way love sometimes looks like silence, and how that doesn't mean it's not real. About the grandmother she'd been told not to ask about, but who turned out to be someone with a heart big enough to hold the missing years without flinching. I cried, openly. And afterward, when everyone had left, Emma hugged me, tight. I don't think I would have made it to this version of myself without you, she whispered. You would have, I said, but I'm glad I got to witness it. On Christmas Eve, I closed the shop early. Snow was falling in slow, fat flakes that looked like something from a painting. The street was hushed. The world felt held. I made tea-lit candles and pulled out an old photo album, one I hadn't dared to open in years. There she was, Rebecca at 5, drawing butterflies in sidewalk chalk. Me, age 27, in a yellow dress I could never quite fit into again. Emma's ultrasound photo, birthday cakes, broken crayons, forgotten smiles. It didn't hurt anymore. It just felt tender, like pressing a bruise that had finally started to heal. That night, I wrote 3 letters. The first was to Emma, folded into a small journal I'd wrapped in brown paper. Dear Emma, don't chase perfection. Chase peace. And if you ever forget how strong you are, come sit with me in the starting over room. Love, Grandma. The second was to Rebecca. Dear Becca, you don't owe me forgiveness, but I hope one day when the hurt softens, we can laugh about things that aren't heavy. Until then, I'll keep a cup warm for you. And the third, that was to myself. I didn't sign it. I didn't even fold it. I just left it on my pillow. Dear Emily, you did the best you could, and somehow that turned out to be more than enough. Quirky fact of the day, snow muffles sound by absorbing vibrations in the air. That's why everything feels quieter after a snowfall. That Christmas Eve, the world felt quiet, not empty, not lost, just at peace. Like maybe, just maybe, I had finally come home to myself. New Year's Eve arrived in a hush of silver frost and soft piano music echoing from someone's upstairs window. I stayed in, not because I was lonely, but because for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to escape into someone else's celebration. I was content exactly where I was, in fuzzy socks, with a cup of spiced cider wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. At midnight, the city erupted with distant fireworks. I lit a single candle in the middle of the bookstore. No confetti, no noise, just one flame to mark the closing of a chapter I never thought I'd survive. And in that moment, surrounded by paperbacks and second chances, I whispered, I forgive you, to Rebecca, to my parents wherever their silences had taken them, to Emma for the years we missed, but mostly to myself. The first week of January, I started offering a new series at the store, Write Your Way Home. It wasn't therapy exactly, but it was honest. People wrote letters to people they'd lost, to children they couldn't have, to the versions of themselves who had made mistakes, endured heartbreak, or simply disappeared somewhere along the way. One man, Joe, a widower with a soft voice and a stutter, wrote a letter to his late wife every week, left them sealed in the poetry section under Mary Oliver. A young woman named Dara folded hers into origami swans and lined them on the windowsill. I started keeping a log of them, not the contents, just their weight. This one feels like relief. This one carries anger under its breath. This one smells like closure. We don't always need answers. Sometimes we just need witnesses. Phew. Rebecca came more often now. She never moved back to town, but she visited every other Sunday. She brought Emma sometimes. Other times, she came alone. Once she brought a lemon tree in a pot with a tag that said, because you kept growing even when it hurt. We were still cautious, still learning. But there was laughter now. The kind that comes when people no longer need to prove they've changed. One afternoon, while rearranging some new arrivals, Rebecca said, You know, I still tell people you're a waitress. I raised an eyebrow. Do you? She laughed. Yeah. I say, my mother was a waitress who once owned the most magical bookstore in the city. That word was struck me. But then she added, and also, still is. You just serve different things now. I wanted to cry. Instead, I said, I hope the tip is good. We both laughed. In early spring, Emma invited me to speak at her college. She was co-hosting an event called Women Who Rewrote Their Stories. I stood at a podium in a room of strangers, students in hoodies and headphones, professors with tired eyes, janitors lingering near the back. And I said, my name is Emily Broner. I became a mother before I became a woman. I lost my family before I found my voice. And I've spent most of my life trying to learn how to be soft and strong at the same time. I told them about the diner, the silence, the bookstore, the photo I stopped carrying, the mug with the gold crack, the lemon tree. I ended with this. Sometimes the people who leave you don't come back. Sometimes they do, but only halfway. And sometimes you stop waiting and you come back to yourself. When I stepped off the stage, Emma hugged me. People need your story, she said. I smiled. No, people need their stories. I just help them find the start. That night, I sat alone in the store journal, open pen uncapped. I wrote a new list, not of regrets, not of things to fix, just this. What I know now. Healing is messy and non-linear. Forgiveness doesn't always require reconciliation. Family can be chosen. Quiet is not the same as empty. I am allowed to want joy. I am allowed to keep going, even when it looks foolish. I am not broken. I am not too late. I am not alone. I am here. Quirky fact of the day. There's a species of flower that only blooms after fire. It hides dormant underground for years, waiting until the heat and ash call it forth. That's what this life has felt like. Not a second chance. A first bloom after fire. And I too am finally in season. Spring wasn't subtle that year. It came bursting in with tulips outside the library, with kids playing hopscotch on sidewalks, still damp from winter, with the sharp, sweet scent of cherry blossoms drifting into the open doors of the bookstore. I wore color again, not just on Sundays or when I had to be presentable, but on Tuesdays for no reason, and Thursdays because joy didn't need an excuse. A green scarf, a coral cardigan, even a pair of lemon-yellow flats that made Rebecca shake her head and laugh. You're becoming unpredictable, she said once. Finally, I replied. Emma brought her boyfriend to the shop one afternoon. A kind, quiet young man with a nervous smile and a guitar case slung over his shoulder. His name is Caleb, she said almost defensively as if bracing for judgment. I didn't offer any. I simply asked, what do you love most about him? She blinked. No one's asked me that. Well, I said, pouring tea. She smiled. He listens, really listens, like I'm the whole story. That was all I needed to hear. We sat in the courtyard behind the bookstore, the three of us sipping tea, as Caleb quietly strummed a few notes. It wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. As if we were rehearsing a future where we all belonged. Rebecca and I began a new tradition, Sunday walks. Sometimes we talked, other times we didn't. We just moved in rhythm with each other through the neighborhood where we used to fight in hushed voices behind drawn curtains. One Sunday, she asked if I wanted to visit her house. Not for anything special, just dinner. Maybe a movie. I hesitated, but she looked so soft, no armor, no edge. Okay, I said. But I'm not helping with dishes unless there's pie. There was pie, and candles, and laughter, and Emma showing me a shelf she'd built for her books, the grandma section, she called it. Every novel I'd ever recommended had a place there. That night, I found myself sitting at their kitchen table after the others had gone to bed. Just me and Rebecca. A teapot between us. Steam curling in the lamplight. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. I know we can't fix everything, she said, but I don't want to waste what's left. I nodded. Neither do I. We didn't say more. We didn't need to. Because real reconciliation doesn't arrive in a single moment. It arrives slowly, like spring. That week, I gave a talk at the local senior center. The topic was supposed to be creative writing in retirement, But I went a little off script. I told them about the bookstore, the club, the letters, the photo I stopped keeping by my bed. And at the end, I asked them to do one thing: write a letter to the person you used to be afraid of becoming, and thank them for surviving long enough to become you. Afterward, a woman named Claire hugged me and said I haven't spoken to my daughter in 19 years. I think I might call her. I said, don't expect fireworks. She smiled. No, but maybe she'll pick up. On a rainy Thursday, I stood in the middle of the store and watched a young couple argue softly over a poetry book. No, she likes Mary Oliver, not Sylvia Plath, the boy said. You're sure? The girl asked. You said that last time and she cried. They noticed me watching and blushed. Anniversary gift, the boy muttered. I walked over and placed a slim volume in his hands. Devotions. She'll love this, I said. It has softness, but strength too. They smiled. He bought it. They left hand in hand, and I stood there for a long moment, holding the warmth of it all like a blessing. Quirky fact of the day: horses don't lie down unless they feel safe. In fact, in a herd, only one will lie down, while others stand guard unless all of them feel protected. That evening, as I closed up shop, I realized I had finally lied down, not to give up, but to rest. Because for the first time in decades, I was no longer guarding the parts of myself I thought the world couldn't love. They were all here now, my regrets, my resilience, my rage, my relief, and they were safe. The day the lemon tree bloomed was the day I realized I wasn't afraid of the future anymore. It had taken root in the back courtyard of the bookstore, despite the unpredictable spring, despite the frost that tried to claim it in March, despite my own doubt that it would ever bear anything but stubborn green. But there it was, one perfect white blossom, fragile, brave. I stared at it for a long time, not because I was amazed, but because I understood. Growth doesn't need permission. It just needs space. Rebecca asked me to go with her to her therapist. She said she wanted me to hear something firsthand. The office was warm, neutral colors, a diffuser humming in the corner. Rebecca sat beside me, fidgeting with a velvet scrunchie on her wrist, like a child tugging on a loose thread. When the therapist asked why she'd invited me, Rebecca cleared her throat. I want to say this out loud, she said, so I don't pretend later that I didn't. I braced myself. But what came next wasn't accusation. It was truth. I resented you for not protecting me from things I never told you were happening. I blamed you for my silence. And when I didn't know how to forgive that, I erased you instead. The room spun a little, not in pain, but in release. She looked at me, eyes full of water she wouldn't let fall. I'm not saying it was fair, she whispered, but I am saying I'm sorry. I wanted to say something poetic, or wise, something a mother would say at the end of a story where things are suddenly okay. But all I managed was, thank you for telling me. And that was enough. We didn't hug, but we sat side by side for the full hour, and when we left, our shoulders brushed. It felt like forgiveness in motion. Back at the bookstore, I started planning something I'd never dared to before, a memoir. Not for publishing, not for fame, just for truth. A collection of essays, letters, vignettes, a map of who I'd been and how I'd survived her. I called it Chapters We Didn't Burn. Emma offered to help edit. Rebecca offered to write the foreword. Are you sure? I asked her, surprised. She smiled. If you're brave enough to tell it, I should be brave enough to face it. One Thursday, Emma arrived with Caleb again, this time with a ring. We're not setting a date yet, she said, giddy and nervous. But I want you to know, I want you there. She didn't say this time. She didn't need to. I took her hands and said, I'll be there, and I'll bring tissues. Later that evening, Rebecca stayed behind, while Emma left with Caleb. We sat on the back steps near the lemon tree. You know, she said, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I'd have said I had no mother. I nodded. And now, she took a deep breath. Now I'd say, I have one who never stopped loving me even when I didn't love her back. That night I cried not from sadness but from recognition, because love isn't erased by silence. It just waits, patiently, imperfectly, sometimes bitterly. But it waits. In June, we hosted the first Starting Over festival at the bookstore. Local artists painted sidewalk murals. A jazz trio played under string lights. Emma read poetry on a small stage, while Rebecca served lemonade from a booth with a crooked hand-painted sign. And I stood in the doorway of my shop, the place that saved me, and watched the women I loved laughing in the same frame for the first time in 30 years. Not performing, not repairing, just being. Quirky fact of the day. When a tree grows around a fence or a chain, it doesn't reject the object, it swallows it. It adapts, redefines its shape. It doesn't erase the wound, it includes it. That night, I stood beneath the fairy lights long after everyone had gone home, my feet tired, my heart full. I looked at the lemon tree at its quiet strength. And I whispered, "We're still growing, aren't we?" It didn't answer. It didn't need to. Some truths are loudest in silence. The morning of Emma's wedding, I woke before the sun, not from nerves, from stillness. That deep, rare kind of stillness that only comes when your life no longer feels like a thing you're running from, or chasing, or trying to fix. I made tea, sat by the window, watched the light peel slowly across the floorboards like honey. Then I reached into the top drawer of my desk and took out something I hadn't touched in years. The photo, the one from the diner, me in my apron, Rebecca, barely 20, her hand around a paper coffee cup, Emma in a high chair, face messy with jam. I didn't cry. I smiled, because that photo no longer represented a rupture. It was the beginning of the story, not the end. The ceremony was held in a garden just outside the city. Wildflowers, wooden benches, paper lanterns swinging like quiet prayers in the breeze. I wore a blue-grey dress, the color of clouds before rain, and around my neck a tiny gold charm in the shape of a lemon blossom. A gift from Rebecca. "You're the root," she said when she gave it to me. "We just took a while to bloom." Caleb cried when Emma walked down the aisle. Emma didn't. She was radiant, calm. The kind of calm that comes from knowing who you are and loving yourself enough to let someone else love you too. During the vows, she said, "I don't believe in perfect love, but I believe in love that shows up again and again, that grows when no one is watching, that forgives even when it's hard, that rebuilds what others gave up on." And then she looked at me, just briefly, but it was enough. After the ceremony, someone handed me a glass of champagne. I didn't drink it. Instead, I walked the garden path behind the tent, past the catering trucks and folding chairs, until I reached a small stone bench beneath a weeping willow. Rebecca was already there. She scooted over to make room. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm more than okay," I said. "I'm full." We sat in silence. Then I said, "You know, there was a time I thought I wouldn't live to see this." She nodded. "Me too." A beat. Then, "I'm glad you did." I turned to her. "Me too." We stayed like that until the music called us back. Two women who had finally forgiven themselves enough to forgive each other. That night, back at the bookstore, I placed the old photo in a frame for the first time. Not hidden away, not stuck in a drawer, but right by the register next to the mug with the gold seam and the lemon tree in the corner. I added a note beneath it. "This is where we started, and every day since we've chosen to begin again." A few weeks later, I finished the memoir. I didn't publish it. I printed 6 copies. One for me, one for Emma, one for Rebecca, one for the bookstore's shelves, one for the starting over room, and one for the girl I used to be, the waitress who once believed she wasn't enough. I placed it in a box with her name on it, Emily, age 27, along with a note. "You made it. You're more than just a survivor. You are soft and brave and beautifully unfinished. Keep going. The best chapters are still ahead." Quirky fact of the day. Lemon trees bloom multiple times a year, but the first blossom is the most fragrant because it carries all the energy of waiting and hoping and holding on. Sometimes I still hear ghosts in the walls of this shop, but now they sound like laughter, like letters being opened, like lives being rewritten in quiet golden ink. And when people ask me what this place is, this bookstore, this life, I just smile and say, it's where we begin again, because that's what healing is. Not a finish line, a doorway. And every day I choose to walk through it. If you're still here, still listening, then maybe this story left something quietly blooming in you too. Maybe you saw yourself in the woman who waited, or the girl who wandered, or the mother who left the door open even after the world told her to lock it and forget. Maybe you're holding your own kind of ache tonight, the kind without a name, the kind that lives in old photos and unopened letters, and the parts of you rarely speak aloud. And if you are, then let this be a gentle reminder. It's never too late, not to forgive, not to return, not to grow something beautiful in a place that once only knew silence. You are allowed to begin again, and again, and again, even if your voice shakes, even if you've lost the map, even if no one claps when you finally open that door. Start anyway. Tell your story, even if the pages are messy, even if the chapters don't follow a neat arc. Let yourself be soft in a world that rewards hard edges. Choose presence over perfection. Choose peace over pride. Choose to stay. You don't need to be a bookstore owner or a mother or a poet. You just need to be you. That, my dear friend, is more than enough. So tonight, as you rest your head, may you feel the quiet bloom of something new unfurling inside you. And may you carry this with you always. The story isn't over. You are still writing it. And somewhere out there, a little lemon tree is blooming just for you.